Welcome to another episode of Assess That with Tom and Nat.
And happy Monday, everyone. We hope everyone had a great weekend, a great summer, and that you're all ready for the week ahead.
Now, by now, everyone in education is fully back to work as it's already a week after Labor Day. So we hope, however deep into the school year you are, a week, a few weeks, a month, that you are off to a strong start.
We do. And we know that when teachers go back to work, it brings excitement / energy / anxiety / exhaustion. I don't know if there's a word that exhilaration that captures all of that, but we hope things are going as smoothly as possible.
Now, I love that you said back to work, because I had a former colleague of mine who back in the early 90s, early on in my teaching career, I think it was like 93, 94, she relayed a story to me that she always had to kind of correct her husband when she was asked how her day was, because she would come home from work and he would ask her, "How was school today?" And she would reply to him by saying, "I don't go to school. I go to work just like you. I have a job. It's not going to school." And I know that sounds like a little thing, but I really appreciated that, because saying that teachers go to school, I feel like in some ways diminishes the profession. It is a job. It is a profession. And the idea that like, how was school today? Like you're talking to a 5-year-old is not the same as when this is their profession that they are paid for. So some of you may not care and think that that's that big a deal, but honestly, I actually kind of think it is.
Well, if I might point out here, and you know exactly where I'm going to go with this. That perhaps education's history as women's work is part of the reason that we use certain words to diminish that actual work, talking about just going to school, how fun.
Yeah.
That could be a whole separate episode. I will not digress, I promise. But words matter so much. They have so much power. So yeah, you're back at work because you're a dang professional.
Yeah, and we can't on the one hand say words matter and then on the same time say, well, but what's the big deal? Like you can't have it both ways.
Exactly.
Now, welcome back to returning listeners, and of course a big welcome to any new listeners who are joining us for the first time. We do appreciate all of you.
We are so excited for this episode because we are going to be breaking down why creativity deserves a place in your assessment plan, no matter what you teach, and more importantly, exactly how to make that happen without stifling student imagination.
And that's the key. Assessing creativity isn't just possible, it's one of the most powerful ways to prepare your learners for the world that is ahead of them.
So that's today's plan. Let's get to it. Today, we're breaking down not just why creativity should be assessed, but exactly how you can do it without killing the very creativity that you're trying to nurture.
Right. And I think this is a pervasive myth in education. Though here in BC, there is an expectation through our core competencies of assessing creativity and innovation. But this pervasive myth is that creativity can't be assessed or shouldn't be assessed, because what is creative to one person may not be creative to another. But that tends to come from a very narrow view of what creativity is, where we just think of creativity as something that's aesthetically pleasing, as opposed to the broader idea of thinking with creative intent. So we're going to get into that, and we're going to talk about how we assess creativity.
Absolutely. It was the first time I considered this was in 2018, I saw you present in Richmond. You were talking about the BC curriculum and these shifts towards competencies. I was working in Alberta, but we came out regardless because we were really thinking about competencies too. And you said very boldly, if I may, at the beginning of that workshop, if you're claiming to be developing something and you're not assessing it, that is a hollow claim.
Yeah.
And that stuck with me, and it still sticks with me to this day because how do you know you're developing it?
Right.
If you don't even know what evidence to look for, and if you do see that evidence, you're doing nothing with it.
Yeah. Rant alert coming here, listeners.
Oh, right.
Here we go. No, but it was one of the frustrations I had about the competencies writ large here in BC was in the mid 2010s, as the new curriculum was emerging, people would say things like, "Oh, we don't assess the competencies," or we don't assess creativity, we just develop it. And my question to people was always, how in the world would you know you have developed something if you haven't assessed it? Now, I think their intent was to say we don't test it, as in a stapled packet of paper.
Right.
But it is really a ridiculous claim to say we're developing creative, critical thinkers for the 21st century. And then a parent says to you, how's my kid doing with that creativity thing? It's like, oh, we don't assess that. I mean, that's such a hollow claim to say that
Totally.
we don't know how someone's developing it. So any school system, whether it's here in BC or outside of BC, in the United States, Canada, around the world, if you're going to make a claim about what you're developing in your students, you absolutely need to substantiate that claim with some kind of, whether it's quantitative or qualitative evidence, that evidence needs to be there. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program.
Thanks, Tom.
I seem to have one of those rants every single episode.
I know. I feel like we need like a button with like a sound effect.
It's like my old don't
here
at
we
me.
go.
All
Ding,
right.
ding. Like the start of Law and Order. I don't know. That comes to my
Here we go.
Here we go.
Listeners, if you can't see Natalie, of course, but every time I start ranting, she sits back in her chair. It's like, all right, I got to give this.
I get some more
I got to give him 3 minutes to get something off his chest.
I'm like, excellent.
All
I got
right,
a little
let's get
brain
into
break. So the thing about creativity is, first of all, it's not fluffy.
Not at all.
It's not just some like, oh, they're really good with crayons. Like,
Okay.
It's an actual competency, like this really critical combination of knowledge, skills, and attitude that is so necessary in our world today. And absolutely, it can be assessed. The problem with people not being able to assess it usually comes back to they don't understand it.
Right.
They don't know how to even really describe what it is other than things look pretty.
Right.
And therefore, that leads to them making these bold generalizations like, well, it can't be assessed. Of course it can be.
Yeah.
You just have to understand what it is. What kinds of knowledge or skills are we looking for when we talk about creativity that can be expressed as some criteria? And anything that has criteria can then be held up against evidence, and some kind of an inference can be made about, hey, does this criteria match what I'm looking at? Yes or no? Why? What would I do instead? What would I offer to help someone match this criteria better? That's all assessment really is.
Yeah.
And so it starts with understanding that it's a real competency. It's a real bank of knowledge and skills and attitudes that you can develop that is more essential today in 2025 than it even was back in like 2001 when we really first started talking about these things called the competencies, because we are constantly in a state of flux right now where new things are coming at us. We're being put in novel situations. We're having to disrupt thought patterns and habits and course correct based on what's going on around us. Like, not to bring it up again, because I know we're tired of talking about this in education, but the pandemic would be a great example.
Yeah.
What is the pandemic and the rapid shift we had to make to online learning, but an opportunity for creativity, to think outside of the habitual? And so it starts with just understanding what it is, that it's not fluff, and that it can be assessed because it just requires a set of criteria.
Yeah. And teachers are creative on a daily basis when they think about new analogies or different examples they use. What you mentioned there, thinking out of habitual thought, comes from Howard Gardner and his 5 minds of the future. And one of them is the creative mind. And you and I talk a lot about that, the idea that it's thinking with creative intent. And if we can focus on transferable skills, if we can focus on things that connect to science, tech, math, STEM, we can look at engineering, et cetera. We look at how it transfers to humanities. We think about problem solving always requires an element of creativity, because if you didn't, you would already have the solution. The problem emerges in society because we don't have a solution to this dilemma.
Right.
And so we have to think creatively about how to resolve this issue. And that requires, so creative problem solving often involves collaboration as well. So you think about the transferability, not just amongst the skills, but between the competencies. So for me, and I know for you and for many, this idea of creativity is still about the mind. It's not about something that's pretty or something that's aesthetically pleasing, but it really is about the way we think and how we are innovative in our approach to things. So teachers have to remind themselves that you get what you value, right? You'll always get what you value. If you never assess creativity, if you never bring it to the forefront, you're probably not going to get it from students, and you're going to sideline creativity, and that's really not helpful in this day and age for sure.
Yeah, something I feel like is really important to acknowledge here as we're talking about what it is and debunking some myths. It's also not something that's just for a select group of students.
Right.
I've wondered often why this happens, why the kids that get these really creative opportunities are the ones who've kind of been skimmed off the top because they've done everything that's asked of them. They're really compliant. They're getting all the check marks. So they get creative opportunities.
Right.
And I sometimes think it comes back because creative thinking is nothing new. Like Benjamin Bloom back in the 60s, I can't remember exactly when he did his research. He created that thing called Bloom's taxonomy, right?
Yeah.
Triangle I'm making to the screen right now. You all probably remember that from your teaching degree. Maybe you forgot it.
Yeah.
But he was talking about, there's a lower order thinking and higher order thinking. And if we recall, the top of the triangle was creativity.
Mhm.
But the problem with that representation is it really does look hierarchical.
Mhm.
This idea that most are going to be remembering, a little bit of understanding, and there's a tiny little bit of time and obviously students who get access to this thing called creativity.
Yeah.
And it was just meant to represent different orders of thinking that require more interconnectedness through the brain.
Mhm.
So there really should be opportunities for creative expression for all students. And
Yeah.
in fact, as someone who worked in special ed for many, many years,
Yeah.
it's interesting because their brains aren't always wired or operating the way that like a neurotypical, if you will, brain is. And so when they're in these situations where they get to think differently and be more creative, they tend to thrive.
Yeah.
Whenever I had the more severe disabilities we often did like ability grouping, just leave that aside for a different conversation. But I had some groups that had a lot of like severe disability codings. But when you put them into these higher order, quote unquote, situations, they would thrive. Because what a part of the problem is these very traditional contexts of sit and do and memorize and regurgitate were just not working with their brain. So it was manifesting as them looking like they're learning disabled.
Right.
But when they're actually in these higher order thinking situations, they blow you away. And yet they can't sit still and memorize like the 5 key names and dates you need. You know what I mean? So it's so important that we give all kids access because this is such a critical skill today.
Yeah. I mean, that's equity, right?
Mhm.
And that's believing that all kids have the opportunity to demonstrate creative thought. And otherwise, we're saying there's a select few, an elite few, and then there's this. Everyone knows the expression, the rich get richer.
Mm-hmm.
So now when you put kids, you skim the top or you have the quote unquote elite students or the gifted students,
Yes.
and they constantly get opportunities to exercise their creative thinking. Guess what's going to manifest when they're 16 years old? They're going to be the more creative students in the classroom. You can see, oh boy, see, they're just smarter.
Exactly.
They're just so smart. Their genetics, the whole thing. And really the system, and this takes me back to Malcolm Gladwell's book, right? About success, where it's this idea that if you just keep nurturing, if you put certain kids, birth month and all those things.
Is this Outliers?
The Outliers, yeah.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
the Outliers, that idea of the key to success and how there's so much that actually is within our control and how we as a society almost inadvertently manipulate these things to the fact where the majority of hockey players are born in January, February, and March, right? That whole idea.
Blew my mind when I read
it's
that.
so mind-blowing. So when you think about like, why are these elite kids when they're 16, 17 years old, the super creative, innovative students, where did they come from? Are they just genetically gifted?
No.
Probably not. I mean, they are. At the same time, so many other kids are, but they've never been given those opportunities.
Absolutely.
The other thing we want to think about is workplace demands now are not so rote and memory. Like there's so many things that are at our fingertips. And I want to make the case for the fact that I know there's an extreme position that says kids shouldn't have to memorize anything. And that's, to me, that goes a little bit too far in the sense that I do think you want things at the retrieval level. You don't want to always have to run to a resource or you do want to have things at the tip of your, tongue or
For
mind that you can get to. But at the same time, there's so much that's shifted in the workplace today in society where, with AI, for example, we now have the opportunity to produce things. You think about fake news, right? Innovation, creative thinking, problem solving, those ideas of competency, they all come into play. Interdisciplinary thinking and being able to look at things cross-discipline, or in school we would call that interdiscipline or cross-curricular, in ways that transcend just the subject. So there's a lot of overlap. Even in curricular subjects, we see practices or competencies that overlap subjects. Making argument, for example, finding a creative way to present an argument to persuade people to your position is something we ask kids to do in English language arts, and it's something we ask kids to do in science. So it is a critical part. Making an argument involves the idea of creativity, not something that's aesthetically pleasing, but certainly an innovative way to lay out your argument so that you are convincing or you are persuading people. So to me, there are just a number of ways, whether it's the equity angle or whether it's the idea of the future and workplace responsibilities or things that are going to require. The whole point of all of these competencies is allowing students to become adaptable human beings. And that adaptability is what's going to have them be successful in a world, as you mentioned, that things are constantly changing. I have to have a level of innovation and creativity about how I go about my work so I continue to stay not just relevant, but I continue to have success. So
absolutely,
let's think about the mindset shift that's required when we talk about creativity. If we're going to assess creativity, this was one of the questions that came up in, this, I'm going to go back to 2009 when our Ministry of Education here in BC was talking about first floating the idea of competencies, and the issue of creativity came up. And one of my immediate thoughts was, how do we assess creativity without stifling creativity, right? How do we make sure, because if you put yourself and you're a risk taker and you put yourself out there, and then somebody says to you, that's not very creative, it's probably going to have you recoil and not take the same risks again. And then you're going to start telling yourself the story, I'm not creative.
Right.
So the question is, how do we assess creativity without stifling creativity? So one of the things that I'd want us to do is avoid things like checklists.
Right.
This is the checklist for being creative.
The irony.
That's the fastest way to get rid of originality.
Yeah.
Right. The fastest way is to say, do these 6 things, right? Or I think one of the hardest things with creativity for teachers is going to be not rushing the process, because creativity takes time.
Yeah.
And being able to make the time for that could be something that we got to remember. It's like, all right, I want you to be creative. Find your creative space by Monday.
In 15 minutes.
In 15 minutes. So that's part of it too. So nothing will kill originality like being too prescriptive with kids and not giving them the space to think.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there.
Yeah.
On the note of time, I just have to add that there's something called our default mode network. And this is usually underpinning a lot of our creative epiphanies and work that we do. It happens when you're doing something else.
Yeah.
You need to be a little bit distracted. For instance, have you ever been in the shower?
Yeah.
And you're washing your hair, doing your thing, and all these ideas just start. You're like, oh, that'd be a great poster. I want to create this. I want to do that.
Dog.
Walking the dog, cleaning the kitchen. Because you're slightly distracted doing something else, that default mode really starts processing these ideas. So thinking about what is, huge air quotes here, unproductive time that you could have students doing something in the classroom and tracking the kinds of epiphanies that come up for them. We talked about this a bit in our book, Rehumanizing Assessment. It could be as simple as there's music playing and they're doodling, or you take them for a walk and they're allowed to put in headphones and listen to a playlist they've curated, and to just notice what ideas come up for them as they're working through a big project, or getting to that end of the unit where we're trying to get into more rich enrichment type of thinking.
Yeah.
But that's a whole conversation for another time.
It's
about hyper-productivity.
It's a good one, though, because I think you bring up such a great point around, it's so counterintuitive to what we often say to students in school, and that is focus, right?
Yeah.
You bring up the research that says we are often at our most creative when we are slightly distracted.
Yes.
So it's walking the dog, it's the shower, it's a glass of wine.
A chat over wine.
Not too many glasses of wine. Okay, you'll solve all the world's problems after 3 or 4. But you're slightly distracted. So our instinct as teachers is to say to students, focus, get focused. But that actually can stifle creativity by having them be like, okay, I got to focus, as opposed to distracting yourself slightly and having the ideas just marinate.
Yeah. So this gets into the point here, which really goes back to your idea of don't have a checklist.
Right.
Our goal is really to illuminate creative thinking rather than to simply prescribe it or to make it like a focused effort. We just want to put students in situations where that thinking can become illuminated to them and to us.
Yeah.
And as a result, we can start a conversation, which is really what feedback is all about. Feedback is just dialogue.
Totally.
So we can have a really good conversation about what's happening, what's coming up, what's not coming up. Why is that the case? What could we try instead? And like I've mentioned earlier, then you really have to have some kind of a guiding criteria to frame that conversation around. So you can come back to it and be like, did this happen for you? Why or why not? Tell me what was going on in your mind during that walk with headphones, or during that 15 minutes of just kind of doodling or drawing or coloring that we just did. Like, what came up for you?
Yeah.
And this is where we don't want to have like a rigid prescribed rubric per se.
Yeah.
We just want some criteria that give us just enough structure so that we can have that feedback dialogue, but enough freedom, if you will, for students to discover and to do things unexpected. Of course, there's a word I'm going to say here because people are going to be thinking it. But Natalie, that sounds so subjective. I'm going to hold your hand as I say this. I probably said it on this podcast before. I'm going to say it again. All assessment and grading is subjective.
Yeah.
But through the use of clear criteria and aligning our interpretations of success between us and the students, we can become more bias resistant. But just let go of this fear that like there's some objective place we can arrive at. Even if it's a multiple choice test, right or wrong, or a checklist you want them to follow, who decided what order those things should go in? Who decided what questions should be asked on that multiple choice test? Who decided what the distractors should be? Who decided what the correct answer is? Who decided how long to give kids? There's so many decisions at every single layer of that experience. Everything is subjective.
Yeah.
So once you accept that and you know that our goal is not to become objective, but just to become bias resistant through clear criteria, then you can actually get into some really cool discussions with kids.
I'm going to try to resist having another rant here on the podcast, but honestly,
triggering you left, right,
no,
and center.
but I do, and I don't know, listeners, it happens. I'm at a certain age, you start yelling at clouds, telling kids to get off your lawn.
Yes.
But one of the things that frustrates me about our profession is how we diminish our profession. Subjectivity is taking students' assignments to a construction site and asking the carpenters to sort through them.
Yes.
The idea of subjectivity in education, I don't know what this is and why. I mean, there are some theories. What teachers do is professional judgment. And I will say this till I'm blue in the face. The difference between a profession and a job is judgment.
Yes.
When you have a job, you don't have to exercise any judgment. Would you go to your doctor's office and say, well, this is so subjective, you think it's my knee? The doctor's making a professional judgment based on the evidence.
That's a great point.
Right? You don't go, well, that's so subjective. It's like, well, you can get a second opinion.
Judgment.
It's professional judgment, right? Based on, okay, we could get an x-ray, we could do an MRI, we could do those things, but based on what you're telling me right now, it is my judgment. And despite the fact that there are examples of including in my own life, where my father had many doctors that got it wrong. That's why they call it practicing medicine. Most of the time they get it right. And their judgment is refined based on their experience. So teachers, when you get a student's assignment in your realm, and this is your expertise, and you've been teaching for a number of years. I mean, if you're a brand new teacher, then maybe this is something that we have to work on. But for most teachers in the profession, you using your quote unquote subjectivity. I'm going to look at the camera and do this.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When you use your professional judgment, that's not subjective. That is you exercising your professional, not just responsibility, but allowing your expertise to inform your decision-making. And I think too many of us in this profession just shy away from embracing that. And a message to leaders, a message to principals, a message to superintendents. We have to support teachers in the use of their professional judgment, because I'll tell you the number one worry is when a teacher uses their professional judgment, a parent's going to challenge that judgment. And that's why we need to calibrate with colleagues and talk about criteria, and leaders need to support the exercising of professional judgment to determine where students are. This never-ending quest for pure objectivity is futile. It doesn't exist. And you made that point earlier. And I think it's something that we have to just get our heads around, is that there is this subjectivity or this pursuit of objectivity. It's got to stop. And we have to reclaim our professionalism in this work.
Go off, King.
There you go. I'm not trying to I tried to not do it in a ranty kind of way.
No, it was good. I liked the look at the camera. It was very powerful.
Thing.
Okay, let's jump into how we actually break down these criteria. Right. Tom, what would you suggest?
So here's the things we're going to look for. I resisted. We could talk a little bit about some of the criteria that Cassandra, Nicole, and I didn't want this episode to be about the book Growing Tomorrow's Citizens, but we do have a process that we talk about.
There's a whole chapter on creativity.
Yeah, there is. And we talk about how you set criteria around thinking with creative intent. There's the preparation phase, there's the incubation phase, there's the illumination phase, then there's the verification, then there's the implementation. So that process-oriented is very good. But here, listeners, here's some things you're looking for. Do you want to know if there's creativity in and amongst what students are doing? One is originality. Okay. Are they exercising sort of original thinking? Now, there is a caveat here that we have to think about. If you've been teaching, for example, for 20 years, and let's say you're a high school teacher, you're teaching for 20 years, and you've got 7 classes a year, say divided by 2 semesters or whatever it is, 7 classes a year in 20 years. You're probably going to see things that you've seen before. So the idea that it's original to you would probably be limited after a while, because at some point when you talk about X number of thousands of students, most of your students are probably going to present you something that is something you've seen before. But what I want you focused on is original for them. Are they stretching themselves and thinking outside of themselves? Are they doing something or processing things in a unique, original way that is outside their norm as a student, as opposed to thinking after 20 years, yeah, I've seen it all before. I saw a kid do that 15 years ago. Well, that's not the point. The point is that for that learner, this is an outside the box way of thinking for them, and they're expressing a lot of originality in that expression. So for me, originality, is there a freshness of the ideas? Are they thinking beyond the obvious for themselves? And let's not compare them to what happened 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Let's not norm this thing.
Right.
Is it original? So if I'm Natalie's teacher, I say, is this an original way of thinking for Natalie?
Right. So we're actually going to go through 4 criteria here. So Tom just mentioned originality.
Yeah.
The second one we want to talk about is flexibility.
Yeah.
So are they able to look at whatever it is they're working through from multiple perspectives? Or if it's more of a problem-solving situation, have they explored multiple solutions rather than just going, I'll take the first one that comes to mind, the easiest one, and then just push through? And there's something in the process here too of, are they willing to course correct when the path that they thought they'd go down led to a whole host of issues and friction, and it's just not working out. And so they have to go in a different direction. Like, think of an example, one of the famous ones from a big project I did once. It was a whole interdisciplinary thing with all my colleagues in middle school. And we had kids create products that they sold at a social entrepreneurship type of marketplace. And one partnership wanted to make branded t-shirts, which is great. And they all had money. Like, it was a whole thing. They were using real money. It was one of the most authentic projects I've ever done. I've talked about it before on here. I'm very proud of it.
Yeah.
And they couldn't figure out how to work within budget and get these shirts branded. So rather than course correcting, they sat and sat and sat. We coached. But come the final day, they had a bag of plain t-shirts and nothing else. It was the most authentic failure I've ever witnessed in my life. And I promise you that there was some reflection that happened there.
Yeah.
But it's not working. So are you going to just keep waiting for the next 2 weeks, or are you going to do something different?
Yeah.
And we all know those kids, right? So getting them into those moments, which happen all the time, and coaching them through is key to flexibility and for them noticing it too.
Yeah. And that's part of what I mentioned earlier. This is the verification phase, right? So when you think about design thinking, which is that cycle of empathy and recognizing how we design a solution, the one thing you have to do is you have to say, is this plausible? Is this something we actually could do? And so a lot of times we would say that maybe you seek an expert and you say, would this be a viable solution? Is that even cost effective, or is this even plausible? Or I don't want to say realistic, because we do want to stretch ourselves, but plausibility would be important, right? We can come up with a lot of creative solutions that aren't plausible. How do we solve the traffic problem here in Vancouver? Well, we just put rocket boosters on the back of every car, and when the traffic gets heavy, everybody just hits the rocket booster and flies home. Well, is that plausible? I'd love it if a 5-year-old came up with that, but if a 17-year-old comes up with that solution, that's not plausible. It's not even like aspirational in a way. So I wouldn't say that that's something. So we want to test it and think about that. Okay, that's not going to work. So the flexibility is, let's go in a different direction, or let's figure that out. A third one we want to talk about is elaboration. You're looking for levels of detail, levels of depth, and levels of refinement as they go through the creative process. Are you seeing them get more and more detailed? Are you seeing them continually, as you mentioned, course correct, adjust, refine, deepen, be more elaborate in how they explain their solutions? That's something. Now, when we're listing all 4 of these, we're not expecting, listeners, that all 4 of these would be incorporated into all of your assessments or all of your asks of students. But we are saying these are different things you could look for. With elaboration, we're talking about if you're expressing an opinion or you have some sort of persuasion that you're trying to make an argument about, your elaboration, your level of refinement is going to come into play. Whereas it might not in some other aspects. So think of these as different things you can add into your assessment. If there's a couple of them, that's great, but elaboration would be another one.
And then the fourth one that we want to talk about is risk taking.
That's a big one.
It's a huge one. So are they willing to experiment, to explore, and horrifyingly to fail.
Yeah.
Like, are we going to hold some safe space for them to
Right.
make some choices and experience like the true failure of it not working out? But then celebrate that happened, because as we say all the time, like, you're either failing or you're learning.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
or succeeding or you're learning, I should say. Sorry, I had that wrong.
Yeah.
Either succeeding or you're learning.
Yeah.
But it's true. And when we look at all of our lives as adults, the things that taught us the most was often failure.
Yeah.
So how do we, through the criteria of risk-taking, celebrate that and say, you know what? Maybe you didn't end up with the perfect branded t-shirts at the end of this project, but what did we learn as a result of that?
Yeah.
And they're going to have probably deeper insights than some of the other kids for whom it was smooth sailing and everything just fell into place as their parents did the project. Just joking.
Well,
they did it all in class. I know they did it all.
Yeah.
It was all in class.
Oh, of course.
Lots of default mode time in that final project, trust me.
Yeah. No, it is, do you think, I tend to think this, and I don't know if you would agree, that if you started to incorporate, whether it's risk-taking, elaboration, flexibility, originality, do you feel like that leads to a greater chance of self-assessment? And would you see that as an opportunity for kids to?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is important we touch on is, it comes back to, okay, we've said criteria, you're going to have this dialogue, but who does the assessment? This is more than any of the other competencies, a space for you as a teacher to offer some prompting, guidance, feedback, coaching, some kind of a summary of what you witnessed.
Yeah.
But it's so important for students to offer their take, their perspective, their summary, their own questions that are coming up for them throughout the process. And I think it's the combination of those two, and sometimes even their peers, right? Like, what did that person who was working with you on this project notice, wonder, were they frustrated by as you went through these different steps? But I think it's so important here that we really triangulate teacher, student, and peer assessment to get the most holistic picture of what can be, for some folks, a very opaque thing.
Yeah. And giving kids that opportunity to, I love that, because reflecting on and articulating to my teacher, hey, normally I approach things this way, but this time I went in this direction. I took the risk to go in this direction, which I don't normally do.
Right.
Like, we can get the kids to unearth some of these elements, I usually do it this way, but I tried something original. I've never done this before. Now, you as a teacher may have seen this every year for the last 15 years, but for that learner, this is a different pathway, and that needs to be celebrated, right?
Of course.
I took a risk, all of that stuff. So let's now dig into this idea of criteria.
Okay. Well, first of all, you need it.
Yeah.
We haven't made that crystal clear yet.
Next topic. No, I'm just
obviously, when possible, it should be student friendly. However, I always pause now when I say that after years of working with teachers on student friendly criteria. This doesn't mean dumb it down.
No.
What we mean is maintain words like elaboration, for instance, one of the criteria Tom just offered. But you might go, oh my gosh, that's too tricky for my grade 7 babies. They won't understand that. Fine. Add a this means that after it, or unpack it, or give them examples, or do a Freire model map of what it is, what it isn't, what's the examples, what are the definitions. So make sure that the criteria is understandable to kids, but don't change like the academic rigor of the words as you're doing that.
I could not agree more with that. The key here is to make sure that if we're going to simplify language, it's around the outcome or the standard or the goal. We don't compromise the language of the discipline, right? No. This notion that, oh, it's too hard for my grade 7 babies. The only reason you know that the word tree is associated with those objects is because someone taught you that's what the word is. So the idea that kids can learn what any word means if you teach it to them. So sitting in the abstract in a conference or a faculty lounge or listening to a podcast, you might say, oh, that's word is too hard for my grade 4 babies or my grade 7 babies. Well, guess what? After a day of teaching them what that word means, they will know what that word means, right? It's not as if you have to dumb down. So be careful not to dumb down the language of a discipline. I always use this example, and it's a bit extreme, but I want to make sure that people understand. Like, we don't dumb down essential language. Elementary students should never be talking about their pluses and minuses. That is addition and subtraction. Those are proper mathematical terms. We never talk about like our timeses. It's multiplication. I've heard these words before, not from many people, let's be fair. But I've heard it enough to say, we're not working on our pluses and minuses. We're doing addition and subtraction. Kids should know the difference between the word product in a language, in an English language arts class, versus product in a math class. Those are proper terms. A quotient. I can learn what a quotient is if my teacher talks to me about what it means.
Exactly.
So when you look at an outcome or a goal, there's nothing wrong with making the language more accessible around the essential terminology, but you teach up to the language, and the criteria should honor that and make sure that we're not dancing around it, because that is critical that they have that. So having criteria that is accessible is important, but doesn't, as you say, dumb it down.
Absolutely. So as we're nearing the end of this episode, Tom, what would you suggest for a teacher who's listening, who maybe hasn't explored this? They want creative learners, but if they're being honest with themselves, they haven't really been developing it because they haven't been gathering evidence of it.
Okay.
What would you suggest as some quick wins?
Sure. Maybe just pick one dimension. Okay, a quick win, pick one dimension, originality, right? And add it to an upcoming assignment, some sort of task, and add that into success criteria. So pick an element, whether it's risk-taking, elaboration, just pick something and add it into an upcoming assignment. Another one might be to have students write a short reflection on the most creative choice they made during an assignment. So if they're doing a project and they were faced with a decision about the direction they wanted to go, have them reflect on what is the most creative decision they made during this one. Or maybe use a creativity gallery walk or something like that, where students highlight, one bold idea that came out of the work that they were doing. So there's a few easy ways. So I think the cliche that we often use is think big, but start small.
Yeah.
So just start folding a little bit of creativity into your current.
Yes.
Before you start going outside of that and stretching yourself beyond that.
I would add a bonus one to this list, one that we actually talk about in our book, which is have students create, and this kind of goes along with like the reflection, but you remember when we used to get DVDs back in the day from the old Blockbuster, and it'd always come with that menu at the beginning, and a part of the menu was like the director's commentary.
Yeah.
Like you can watch the movie with the director talking over it and commentating what's happening and why. But think about a product students create and what's the creator's commentary that they can produce. So it could be voice recorded. If it's like a video multimedia presentation, they could do a voiceover. It could be written if it's something that's more of a written product with Post-its or whatever. But actually get students to write this commentary of like their whole process, beginning to end, why they made the choices they did, and coach them towards like, hey, can you match this with the criteria we're looking at of like originality? Like do a commentary of how originality really showed up for you throughout this process. And it'd be fun. You can even watch like something with a commentary over it just for fun to get a sense of like, oh yeah, people do this. There's creators all over our world today and everything we consume, especially with social media, YouTube, spaces they love. So getting into this idea of a creator's commentary can be really fun too.
Yeah. I mean, one of the biggest things for teachers to think about is just making it safe for kids to take risks and be creative. That's a really important part of all of this work. So as we sort of bring things home, the more kids practice this, the more confident they'll be as thinkers. The main takeaway we want listeners is for you to think about that creativity can and should be assessed.
Yes.
And if it's done well, it's going to really amplify learning. So again, look for things like originality, fold in things like flexibility or elaboration, or just talk more openly about risk-taking and reward that risk-taking. Even if the risk-taking is a failure, let's make sure that we spend time rewarding that risk-taking. That's really important.
And so here's one challenge that we're going to leave you with. Okay. As you look up your upcoming month of teaching, what is one task that you can intentionally assess creativity within? Start a dialogue with students about this, and then post about it, write about it, email us. We'd love to hear what actually happens in the thinking and the learning that you start to witness in your learners.
Okay, that is it for this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Assess That.
And don't forget to follow Assess That on Twitter, X, or Instagram. I know.
We got to just call it X.
I know. We got links for those in the show notes.
Yeah, and if you have a specific topic you'd like us to explore, we'd love for you to DM us or email us in any way that you can on all of those platforms.
And a reminder to check the show notes for all of the links to those professional development opportunities we talked about.
Please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. That helps us grow the podcast reach.
And finally, if you like what you're hearing, please keep spreading the word about this podcast to your friends, your colleagues, or on social media. We would really appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll see you next time.